Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 14th of September 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson, and we will be joined by David Ellis from Strategic Defence Initiatives to cover material pertaining to defence. Well, we're still here despite the heat wave that was forecast.
I don't think we got it, Brian.
I don't think we got it, no, but apparently there was a danger to the country. But it hasn't materialised, so we're not quite sure where that came from. We're pleased to say it's a nice day here in Plymouth, and I've got quite a few reports across the country for blue sky. Blue sky thinking leads us to the Prime Minister, I think.
Indeed, because she was having a telephone conversation with Angela Merkel yesterday, and a Downing Street spokesman has said apparently that Chancellor Merkel called the Prime Minister earlier yesterday to update her on plans for the meeting of the 27 EU member states in Bratislava on Friday. They would not be discussing Brexit, however. So what did Theresa May have to say? Well, she told Angela Merkel that Britain will continue to support EU free trade negotiations, including TTIP, while we remain full members of the EU, which by all accounts is going to be forever.
Yeah, so she's declaring it there. We are a full member of the European Union. She's obviously quite happy with that situation. So at the moment, the whole of the Brexit agenda is a puppet show.
Yes. And another puppet show, as in, I don't know, a Sooty or something, because this is just getting ridiculous. HS2 back in the news today for a couple of reasons. First of all, because they have launched a number of public consultations around phase 2 of the project, which is around crew, and so they've published some dates for people to come to meetings and discuss the situation. But at the end of the day, what this is about is the Public Accounts Committee, who have criticised the whole project, saying that it needs a realistic timetable, that the Public Accounts Committee is still in the dark, they say. This is Meg Hillier, who's the chairperson of the Public Accounts Committee, and they're saying that they're not convinced that the first phase of the £56 billion project will open at the end of 2026 as planned. Now, Brian, David, this is 120 miles of high-speed rail that we're talking about here. 120 miles. I just wanted to remind everybody once again that China has just finished the opening of, 12,000 miles of high-speed rail. And in the next 10 years, in fact, by the day that 120 miles of high-speed rail in Britain opens, China will have opened another 13,000 miles of high-speed rail. So Britain builds 120 miles, 119 miles, China 12,000. In the 1840s, Brian, we built 8,000 miles. In that decade of the 1840s, we built 8,000 miles of train, of railways in Britain, when railways were absolutely the highest technology available at the time. And yet today we can't, we're told. This is a continuation of the same old scam that the British are rubbish at engineering, and we shouldn't be looking at engineering or technology to develop the country because we're just crap at it, apparently.
Well, I believe this is all part of the attack by the British government on the British nation. The aim is to completely rubbish this nation. You're right, of course, with the amount of railways built, but we also built huge stretches of railway in India, for example, and some aspects of the Cornish light railways associated with the mines found in the depths of the jungle in South America. So this is a complete and utter lie by the government, but it follows close down of everything that we are known for. So the shipbuilding industry gone, the aircraft industry largely dismantled, car industry dismantled. This is not a result of the loss of the will in the nation. This is the result of government policy to close these things down.
Absolutely. Perfect example of it, Brian, is the rather disgusting Titanic exhibition in Belfast, which is all about people's deaths. It's all about dying. It's all about failure. Never mind the 100 years of successful shipbuilding that took place in Harland and Wolff in Belfast. Let's just focus on the one disaster. Right. And it's you mentioned the BBC earlier because, of course, they're key drivers in this. And this morning, John Humphreys absolutely lambasting HS2 as being too expensive, too difficult, just too difficult for us poor British to get on and build. And of course, the BBC ran the Tomorrow's World program for many years, really promoting the idea of science and technology. But they, at the same time, they sort of had this Mickey take out of it. There was this underlying thread.
Before we hand over for some comment from David on this, I'll just add that isn't it remarkable that as you drive around UK at the moment, every single stretch of motorway in utter chaos. What's the cause of that? Well, of course, is road charging apparatus is what's going in. It's nothing to do with intelligent motorways. This is the infrastructure to charge people to go on the motorways. This work has cost billions. Nobody knows how many billions. It's never been fully debated in Parliament. So we can waste all this money on the motorways, but we can't build a simple section of high-speed rail link. David, we're feeling particularly cold and cynical today as we watch this nation attacked by yet another government.
Well, you're certainly not cynical or cold. You're red hot and on the money. I couldn't agree more, guys. We've seen this. Come back, Dr. Beeching. All is forgiven. What are the principal factors here? We're dealing with prime drivers and engineering, which is being kicked to death and strangled to death successively for 60, 70 years now. The Hitachi S2 line will principally be about Hitachi engineering and a huge amounts of money being flowed to Hitachi. So why are we doing that? What's the key thing here? I believe that it's timing. And you're quite right, Mike, a lot of fuss over 120 miles of railway line. What actually is at the root of the fuss? And I believe the fuss is about the further stripping out of principal industry in Birmingham and surrounding area, what's left in Coventry. And I think that the two have to scissor, that we'll see the HS2, the Hitachi High-Speed 2 come in as the stripping out of what's left of the principal industry left in Birmingham, and the two will have to coincide. There's some sort of dealing going on in there in Whitehall. It's all a bit murky. I spoke to a professor who was at high level with the company in question, and was saying that there was a lot of dealing going on, and I can relate to that because when I met the European boss of Ford many years ago, he stated to me openly that he would have shut every single Ford car plant in this country given the choice, but he couldn't because Ford globally wanted the political support from the people at the time of the Iraq War. So you can see the kind of master dealing that goes on. But yes, Brian, you're absolutely correct. Once again, British industry and British engineering, British jobs, British families, getting the short end, and an indictment upon the failure of successive governments and this interface that we see with our MPs is just absolutely abysmal.
Yeah, it's a lot of people still can't grasp the reality that the nation is being attacked by its own government, but it doesn't matter whether, of course, it's Labour or there's Lib Dems in there or it's Conservatives. It is their agenda. They are anti-British, and this is becoming ever easier to see. And Nick Clegg, I believe, has now crawled out of his hole somewhere to start now talking about Brexit, which we're going to get on to. Now, David, you asked for just brief comment on this Telegraph today, which is saying that Mr. Juncker is, he's going to have a State of the Union address, and he's saying we need to get our act together in the EU because there's going to be a problem. Mike, you've got more on this. What's this gentleman got to say?
Well, he gave the State of the Union address this morning, and he began by saying the next 12 months are decisive if we want to reunite our union. And he highlighted a number. Well, let's see. He said it only works when we're all pulling in the same direction. Apparently, EU institutions, national governments, and national parliaments alike. And we have to show again that this is possible in a selected number of areas where common solutions are most urgent. And the main subjects that he was covering were free movement. He said, we Europeans can never accept Polish workers being harassed, beaten up, or even murdered on the streets of Harlow. This is a lie, but anyway, let's go on. The free movement of workers is as much a common European value as our fight against discrimination and racism. He talked about the death penalty. He talked about trade. He talked about data protection. He talked about the posting of workers. Workers should get the same pay for the same work in the same place. Europe is not the Wild West, but a social market economy, he said. Talked about competition. Talked about the steel industry. We already have 37 anti-dumping and anti-subsidy measures in place to protect our steel industry from unfair competition. And he talked about the agricultural sector, talked about copyright, connectivity, investment in jobs, solidarity, and migration, where he said, today we are launching an ambitious investment plan for Africa and the neighbourhood, which has the potential to raise 44 billion euros in investments. It can go up to 88 billion if member states pitch in. The new investment plan for Africa and the neighbourhood will offer lifelines for those who would otherwise be pushed to take the dangerous journeys in search of a better life. And of course, a key part of it was defence. And so let's see what he had to say there. He said, Europe needs to toughen up. Nowhere is this truer in our defence policy. And I have highlighted the words defence policy there because that's how it was in the original script. So he is highlighting certain key words out of this little spiel that he gave. He said, Europe can no longer afford to piggyback on the military might of others or let France alone defend its honour in Mali. He said, without a permanent structure, we cannot act effectively. It's time we had a single headquarters, again highlighted, for these operations. He said we should also move towards common military assets, in some cases owned by the EU, and of course in full complementarity, if that is a word, with NATO. And he said that is why we propose before the end of the year a European Defence Fund to turbo boost research and innovation. And of course, a European Defence Fund, David, this has got to be leading towards a European Treasury and a single European defence budget. We're seeing that Juncker, once again in the State of the Nation today, is describing exactly the things that you've been warning about for 2 years.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, they're not quite using the exact in a sanctum sanctorum language because he's told everybody openly now. I mean, gloves are off. We're going to do this. Now, the understanding that I'd had from numerous senior staff and the occasional political figure, with the exception of Lord Tebbit, who's got it absolutely bang to rights, was that the EU military union would facilitate instantaneously the EU Treasury. Once it has the Treasury, it can then proceed to its final objective of full political union just in facto. So it's a vital tactical objective of this thing that's called the EU to achieve. So the stalling point, which I understand from numerous admirals, was that they required political alignment or political agreement from our politicians, our interface down there in London, to get and move forward with agreeing to actually, yes, you can have it. Now, of course, this is somewhat double-edged because what Juncker is doing is he's basically going to sort of force it through and dictate. And the other point, of course, is that people keep saying that there were no plans. Utter lies. There's been plans for 70 years. It's just everybody's chosen to take a blind eye to it, or they've been inept. They were there for everyone to see. Now, the other thing, of course, that's key to this is we know for a fact that the EU's military command and control structure and systems has already been built. It's already in place. They have 4 command and control centres, Northwood adjacent to our Royal Navy, Paris, Potsdam in Germany, and there's one in Greece. So they can effect on prescribed protocols EU military union. So that's Air Force, Army, Navy, internal and external, in 12 hours flat. They literally go in, turn the lights on, activate the Faraday cages and the satellite phones, and they're off and running. So what we're going to see really is this is going to speed up. And it's going to speed up very, very quickly. Now he's basically made an announcement there that this is going to happen. It'll happen quite quickly. So it would be a reversion in effect. So we've seen a lot of press coverage over the last week about this from The Guardian and one or two others. I think there's been a bit in the Express. But principally the thing that interests me greatly about The Guardian was that they were saying that Germany were calling for it. Well, Germany hasn't called for it. France hasn't called for it. Britain hasn't called for it. The EU are calling for it. And what does the EU represent? The EU represents a conglomerate of master central banks, Bank of England, Bank of International Settlements, American, and it then facilitates this through the ECB, through down into the command chain, into the EU and the likes of Herr Juncker. He's a long way off from the actual nerve centre of this. He's just delivering it. So this is going to happen. May everybody wake up and realise this will be such a pivotal move for the United Kingdom and Her Majesty's Armed Forces and the industry and everything that goes with it. I cannot stress enough to everyone how important this is and how inept and complicit our MPs are.
Well, just to give a clue as to when we might get a clue as to what the timescales are, one of the things that he also said was that the Lisbon Treaty enabled those member states who wish to pool their defence capabilities in the form of a permanent structured cooperation. I think the time to make use of this possibility is now, and I hope that our meeting at Bratislava on the 27th, in a few days from now, will be the first political step in that direction. So perhaps after that meeting, we'll get a fairly clear idea of where and how fast they intend to go ahead with this.
Yeah, next week by the sound of it.
Yeah.
That quick. They've obviously hit the wall with the euro, and in order to facilitate keeping the euro propped up, as Lord Tebbit called it, they've got to go forward with this. It's just basically it's like the emperor's new clothes. Doesn't it look pretty? But no politicians are prepared to stand up and go, "You're all naked."
Yeah. We just remind people, I think it was last week, we actually showed the proposed agenda for that Bratislava meeting. It was either last week or the end of the week before. And of course, it was a blank sheet of paper with a large amount of eating, drinking and photographs. And I think it was 4 hours of supposed work was blank. But we now actually can see that it must have been rubber stamped before, and it's just going to be pushed through the meeting, Mike, the amount of subjects that you've reeled off.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, of course, whilst the EU has been building its military might, the objective of British governments has been to absolutely cut British military capability. And we've had some remarkable things going on in the background, but I just want to start off this trail with this. I tweeted out yesterday. Now, David, you actually alerted this to me, but we had former Admiral Lord Boyce asking a question, which was basically, he says, following the question of the noble Lord West, the minister's answer and the fact that the Americans are asserting their right to freedom of navigation in the areas under dispute, will the Royal Navy be supporting our allies in that endeavour? So here's Boyce talking about the Americans' dispute with the Chinese in the China Sea, and he says, well, shouldn't the Royal Navy be assisting the American endeavour? I just found this astonishing, David, because at the moment we've got massive problems, particularly in the Royal Navy. We've got no operational carriers. We've got huge problems in the nuclear submarine fleet. We can't recruit. We've got insufficient crews to run ships. In fact, they've tried sort of taking the crew off one ship and moving them across to man another ship. That was an utter disaster. We've got modern Type 45s that can't work in warm water. I don't know whether Admiral Boyce knows the temperature of the water in the China Sea, but it might be a tad too hot. And this man seems to think that Britain, with all the problems we've got with our defence at the moment, should poke a big stick in with China. Are these people on some sort of substance, David, or are they just living in their own reality in the In and Out Club in London, for example?
Well, I think in terms of substance in the Lords, crikey. Well, the substance that we need basically is we need more of the likes of Norman Tebbit, where he's prepared to pull his Jesus Christ switch and restart the engines on his Bristol Britannia, don't we? This is it is a nonsense, because we're seeing an overlap here with this China thing. The Americans have pushed flat tops into China some months ago, and they're pressing up that end of the world. So we're seeing a bit of a pincer move, really, aren't we? Let's look at it, stand back and look at it from sort of, a bigger perspective. We're seeing a lot of EU alignment now these comments from West and Boyce, or I don't know whether like it's some sort of double act, like the two Ronnies, like the two admirals or something or other here, because this pincer movement here and all this overlapping stuff in the press, these comments in the Lords, you know, US pushing flat tops into China. We're now seeing this saber rattling raised to a huge degree with Russia. We're seeing Juncker's now talking about, I want my EU military union. I mean, it may well be colloquially known in the mainstream as EU army, but it isn't. It's military union, army, navy and air force. I suspect what's going to happen here is these comments from Boyce are alluding to, are we going to support with the Royal Navy EU NAVFOR in this EU Navy, in this endeavour out in the China Sea? And if that's the case, along with this other destroyer that went out to Libya, you know, we're suspecting actually that the EU Navy is now calling the shots, not the Royal Navy. So this is all sort of converging, isn't it? You know, so will it be a dog and pony show? Will Theresa May politically align and agree to it? Because if she does, there isn't a Brexit. I can assure everyone. If we don't have control of our own military independently and our own industry independently, we will not Brexit. There will be no Brexit. It'll be, even if they say there is, it'll be a sham, because we will be so intertwined with what they're doing. You know, we won't know whether we're drill punched or bored.
Well, David, thank you for that. We've chosen a few images here just to focus people on what sort of things senior officers have been talking about. I find some of these comments by retired senior officers, well, it verges between unbelievable to the most incredible arrogance. These are the people who've been in post while they have watched and remained silent as defence cut after defence cut has come in. Where are we now? We're at the state where this nation cannot defend itself in any sustained war scenario, whether it's a few miles away in Europe. So, sorry, if we can just pop that one back up. We've got the Telegraph here. Our defence cuts leave us looking feeble in the eyes of the world. The term appeasing our enemies is used. This article by Admiral Nigel Essenhigh, it was June 2015. But this is a ridiculous language. We are talking about the destruction of our armed forces to the stage that they can't operate properly. Here we've got Admiral Essenhigh. I've covered his face, unfortunately, but the Admiral on the left is Boyce. So we've already mentioned this man. He leaves the Navy. He's now Warden of the Cinque Ports. I'm not quite sure what that achieves. But here we've got the comment from these two. Britain must be able to show its enemies that it will not be coerced into submission through military weakness when diplomacy fails in the future, like in the 1930s. Now, that's a pretty serious comment, but neither of these two men back that up with any real substance and counter to the political agenda. The UK, again, rightly places reliance on collective security, this time through its contributions to the UN and NATO, but as then does so while steadily weakening its own defence posture. Successive reductions have also seriously undermined our critical defence relationship with the United States. I think it's significant that they mention UN and NATO. Well, UN will say NATO. Absolutely no mention, of course, of this insidious joint effort with the European Union. And we've got the French military freely operating in Britain at the moment. Are these people, I'm going to say it again, are they in their own reality? Do they believe their own rhetoric, or are they simply ignorant of the political agenda?
Well, they're just not using the right language, are they? You know, from my point of view, personally and privately, there are some that do, but they've got to take the gloves off and use plain speaking English in any of these editorials that they're putting out, and really get down to sort of brass tacks. You know, we've seen an unrealistic clinging on to NATO, despite the fact, by politicians as well as military staff, that despite the fact that the EU are going to circumvent that clearly. And you know, even if we were, I'm going to come back to the former head of the EU military staff, who's told me that, well, you know, we were just hoping that they'd invest in it properly.
Yeah.
So this is the kind of comments that we're getting, and some from the general in charge, the chief in charge of NATO, has sort of said, well, yeah, well, it doesn't really work like that, because who's calling the shots? Well, they might well invest in it properly, but from your point of view, you're only seeing one end of the spectrum. What's happening with the industry and the procurement capital budgets and the industry and everybody's jobs? You know, all we've seen in Britain for 50, 60 years is our industry disappearing. So what's the benefit? What's the point of this? This so-called EU, you know, thing. So, you know, they've got to start using the right language here. You know, the last ones that spoke out properly about the cuts, I mean, we tapered off really with Admiral Woodward in 2010 saying we couldn't defend the Channel, you know, a proper comment. What an indictment. I'm not really sure how these guys are either helping the situation, the Navy, or people's understanding here with these sorts of comments.
I think we're seeing the old boy network at its worst. They've been given the honours, they're lords, they're sirs, they're dripping with gold braid, but actually they're in isolated bunkers wherever they're living out in the sticks. They think that politicians are honourable people, and of course what's really happening is treason. Let's just put these two up on screen here. We've got a reminder. These were some of the documents that were signed in order to link the British Army in with the French. And a while ago, we had those big joint operations on Salisbury Plain. So at the moment, Theresa May not commenting on the fact that the British military, as you say, David, locked in with the French in particular. And we're going to come back to this article from UK column. We stand absolutely alone in exposing the treason, how it was done with the help of the Franco-British Council behind closed doors of the ambassador in Paris. And then we've got David Cameron. He followed that along with his defence cuts. And here he is. He's saying that the review of 2010, which started the real destruction, is a step change in the way we protect this country's security interests. So no doubt about what David Cameron's job was. It was to reduce the scale of Britain's armed forces so that we had to lock into the European system. But on the subject of Cameron, I'm going to bring this on screen and ask what's going on here, because he's suddenly being slated by the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee. They've said by the summer of 2011, the limited intervention to protect civilians, they're talking about Libya, had drifted into an opportunist policy of regime change. That policy was not underpinned by a strategy to support and shape post-Gaddafi Libya. And here's the result: political and economic collapse, inter-militia and inter-tribal warfare, humanitarian and migrant crises, widespread human rights violations, the spread of Gaddafi regime weapons across the region, and the growth of Islamic State in North Africa. So the man who was cutting Britain's military to dangerous, treasonous levels is busy abroad creating wars. Mike, why the sudden attack on Mr. Cameron? It's almost like he's being labelled Blair.
Yes, but he was being strongly defended by Theresa May in Prime Minister's questions today. What a wonderful public servant he was, and so on. So
right.
It's pretty unclear. Maybe it's pretty unclear what's driving this. But there seems to be some unhappiness from some circles about him.
Okay, but how do we explain this conundrum that you risk the country by cutting your own defence capability? You then hop overseas, whether it's Afghanistan or Iraq, Libya or Syria, and you're creating. I mean, this is.
What you're doing there is creating an enemy, which then you have made sure that the country is not equipped to deal with. That, of course, is creating a problem, which is going to cause. We're going to get back to the causing a reaction, and then they're going to provide some kind of solution to that. Perhaps the EU military is that solution. Okay,
David, just a quick comment on that, and I want to bring in Mr. Putin, who's now back as the bad boy.
Well, the comments from Cameron are completely correct. It was a step change. What the step change was, it was a step change towards EU military union, whether he knew it or not. That's the effect. By deed or effect, I'm not interested whether he did it by deed. The effect is nonetheless. We've got a shortening of our position, a lengthening of their position. It's as simple as that. Our losses were their gains, and it just facilitates the political argument. So all the other stuff that was the collateral thing over in Libya and Iraq was just a rerun of a previous recipe. This is a nonsense. It's so blatantly apparent now. All we need is the public to wake up a lot quicker than what they actually are as to what's really going on here and how this is being, and how the country's being manipulated.
Right. Well, brilliant introduction, because via Putin, we're going to give people some good news. We're just reminded this one, of course, Putin a while ago, particularly by the BBC, was weaponizing migration. It was that nasty Mr. Putin that was causing all of the migration problem. NATO chief Vladimir Putin weaponizing refugee crisis to break Europe. So although Putin at the time was stepping in to try and sort out what was happening in Syria, and was also pointing out the relationship between the US, UK and Saudis, he was the bad man. BBC failed to mention people like Bilderberger Peter Sutherland, who said that we should encourage the migration in order to break down the nation states. It's the EU's really responsible. Now, we showed this some time ago, but let's think of it now. What's this new Eastern Outlook article got to say? Well, here it is. It's saying that the flood of uncontrolled war refugees from Syria, Libya, Tunisia and other Islamic countries is being orchestrated by a cabal of NATO-linked think tanks, which is rather different from Putin. But thank you very much to the person who sent us this through. Now, it's from we missed this originally, so we're going back a bit to August. But here was the headline: Russia's secret plan to destroy the EU and NATO. Putin funds a covert anti-West op across Europe. And on it goes. Should be able to bring this one up here. The findings in a report by the Wilfred Martin Centre for European Studies finally shed light on Russia's overt and covert operations deep inside the UK. And here it is, the bear in sheep's clothing. And I looked at that and I thought, I sense something here, Mike. Yeah. And what do we know about this little organisation? Well, if you look at the Mr. Martin himself, now deceased, but this is Adenauer Mark IV. This is all part of the origins of the European Union. And I had a look at the team that wrote the report, a group of, I can call them young lovelies. I'm in an age where I can do that, Mike. We've got a vet, done a bit of pharmaceuticals, a bit of journalism. We've got an ethics researcher who's done a bit of drugs. We've got a judge's assistant, but he's public affairs. And we've got a young lovely who's researcher of Russia and information warfare. So I took a quick look at her Twitter page and I found this little insert here, which is from Global Voices. And I thought that rings a bell. So I had a look at that and, oh dear, open society.
Oh dear.
So we seem to have this gentleman, George Soros, trying to blame President Putin for the whole of the George Soros operation. And what's my good news for our audience today? Well, this must tell us that Mr. Soros is getting very panicky, that the public can actually see through the scam of his non-government organizations with billions of dollars to destabilize our societies. It's pretty easy when you know where to look for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's have a look at GCHQ, because, of course, they're in the mainstream press today all over the place, because they're, well, as he's being described, their cyber boss is planning to create the Great Firewall of Britain to rival the Great Firewall of China, if you believe what the media is saying. The Guardian article here saying that they're planning to create this Great Firewall. The proposal was made at a conference in Washington by the Director General of Cyber at GCHQ, Kieran Martin, who's the head of the National Cyber Security Centre. So what's that all about? Well, here we go. They've issued their prospectus introducing the National Cybersecurity Centre. It says, his introduction says, the internet is an increasingly intrinsic part of our lives. The UK's digital economy is strong. with companies of all sizes and sectors using online opportunities to increase their reach and productivity. In government, we are increasingly enabling the public to access services online, cutting costs and making it easier to interact with the state. In short, the world is a more open and connected place. So cybersecurity is increasingly important too. As the 2015 National Security Strategy set out, cyber is a tier 1 threat to the UK's national and economic security. Well, that's all well and good, but at the same time, it's a little unfortunate because unfortunately, the National Audit Office today has also highlighted the fact that in the last 12 months, government has suffered 9,000 data breaches.
Oh, can't imagine that.
It's a real shame. So reporting personal data breach, well, let's just see what they say here. They found that the Cabinet Office failed in its duty and ambition to coordinate and lead government departments' efforts to protect information. The Cabinet Office, quotes, tried to take a more strategic role in offering support and guidance to central government departments. However, senior level governance remains complex and unclear. Until recently, a wide array of central teams had been involved in information assurance and protecting information, sometimes offering overlapping and contradictory advice. And they said reporting personal data breaches is chaotic, with different mechanisms making departmental comparisons meaningless. In addition, the Cabinet Office does not have access to robust expenditure and benefits data from departments, in part because they do not always collect and share such data. The Cabinet Office has recently collected some data on security costs, though it believes that actual costs are several times the reported figure of £300 million. So everything in a bit of a mess with regard to data security and information security, which makes it all a little ironic that what GCHQ seems to be doing is setting themselves up to provide a commercial service to private companies, when GCHQ clearly can't provide such a service to government at the moment.
Can't provide it to government, totally unaware of who's talking to who about drugs or children or organised crime overseas. But apparently they're now going to protect us from baddies on the internet. But I do believe we can opt out of this system coming, Mike.
Well, possibly not, because this is an interesting aspect of this, because this isn't a firewall in the Chinese sense of all internet traffic going through a set of routers that gets filtered. What they're talking about is DNS filtering, which is a domain name system. This is the system that converts names like ukcolumn.org, for example, to IP addresses of physical machines that are on the internet. And of course, this is one of the real weaknesses on the internet because it's a major potential point of attack. And if what GCHQ is proposing is to filter the DNS system, well, perhaps websites that they don't particularly like might just fall off the internet, at least in the sense that people won't be able to find them, like us, maybe.
Indeed, but if we don't like the system, we can opt out, and presumably we get a big black spot in the GCHQ board that you're a dissenter because you don't want to join in with our system. But remember, GCHQ shares part of the 2 billion security budget, but they didn't know anything about Mr. Vaz's activities. They didn't know anything about his chauffeur's activities. They don't know anything about the drugs in Westminster. They don't know anything about the money going into Libya. I think we could close them down and we'd be a lot safer, probably. What we need is the rule of law restored. So we'll just remind people, Glastonbury, Thursday, tomorrow. The 15th September, tomorrow, 7:30 in the evening, a talk on reasserting the rule of law. And we believe this is a very, very important subject. In fact, the most important subject. We're now living in Britain in 2016, which is out of control. There is no proper system of law, and it's going to take the wider public to reassert that rule of law. But more nasty stuff coming in on the subject of our court system, Mike.
Well, this is information security once again. It has a connection to the last points. This is the Common Platform Programme, which, of course, we've been hinting at this for quite some time because we've been covering Lord Brian Levison's coverage of how they are going to turn the court system into an electronic court system. And the government has announced that they are now opening a survey, giving certain people the opportunity to help design what they're describing as secure ways of accessing and sharing information with regard to criminal prosecutions. The design work is key to the Common Platform Programme, and that's being delivered by the HM Courts and Tribunals Service and the Crown Prosecution Service, which is going to help practitioners access information digitally. So no more big court bundles. Instead of huge big files of documents you're just going to carry about an iPad or something, seems to be what they're heading towards. They say that for this to be valuable and representative, the programme would like as many practitioners as possible to take part in the survey. So the public don't count. This is representative democracy. This is participatory democracy, not representative democracy. So only certain people get to participate. Well, let's have a look at what they were saying about the Common Platform Programme. This is Loveday Ryder, who is the director of the programme. She said that the vision of the Common Platform is one of business transformation. And her colleague, Paul Whitaker, who's the Common Platform lead for business change, said that the aim is to put in place a shared business process. And then she went on to say it's a very exciting set of business changes that hopefully will change the criminal justice system, a once-in-a-generation opportunity. So what we're seeing is the digitisation of the court system. It's a once-in-a-generation opportunity, but it's all about business change, because courts are no longer, if they ever were, about justice or providing answers to conflict. It's about business and making money.
And profits.
And profit.
David, what do you pick up from that or from this initiative?
I don't like the sound of any of it. I don't like the sound of any of it at all. You know, when you overlap that with GCHQ, basically you want to internally sift and censor what people are looking at. You know, we've got to sort of say two things. You know, come back, Gordon Welshman, all is forgiven. And I just, you know, looking at all of our principal problems in this country, you know, having this once in a lifetime, you know, opportunity to do this in the courts, you know, this isn't the way forward. This is retrograde. Don't agree with it at all.
Well, David, I can tell you more about what's happening in the courts at the moment. A lot of this has come out of the woodwork as a result of our trying to help Melanie Shaw. But essentially, we're now seeing the close down of courts. We're seeing the fact that the public are denied access to courts instead of courts being open, so the public can come in, sit down and see justice. No, we don't want the public in. So members of the public are finding that when they try and attend court cases, they're being asked why they are there. They are being asked to identify themselves. And in many cases, they're being told, no, you can't come into our secure court building. But even the court staff themselves are now reporting that they are working in increased chaos as cases are being moved around the country as courts are closed. And they are totally unsure as to how the system is supposed to work. So how does this impact on people? Well, if we bring in Melanie Shaw, the very brave whistleblower from Beechwood Children's Home, this lady's crime has been to speak out about her own abuse and that of hundreds of other children. She has said and consistently maintained that children were murdered at Beechwood and in other children's homes. She has an excellent memory. We can now say she's now 16 weeks into Foston Hall, Uttoxeter prison. She's been on remand. Nobody of her close associates and lay legal advisors can get near her. She's had no visit. She's been in segregation. And from 2 brief phone calls, she said that she's been threatened by prison staff. That includes staff in riot gear coming into her cell and threatening rape. And I have to say to our audience today that in making these statements, Melanie has been totally measured. She has not appeared in court. She's only been allowed to appear via a video link. And she has to endure a court-imposed legal team who she's tried to sack at least once. And that imposed legal team has prevented any contact from the lay legal advisors that Melanie wants to help defend her. Now, she is due to appear in Peterborough Court on Friday. We don't know the time. That is, she will appear by video link, but there is a court case. We understand this is for sentencing. We're not aware of what the crime is at the moment, but it looks as though the intent is to get Melanie Shaw locked up in prison again, if not through into some form of psychiatric institute. And why are they so keen on silencing her? Because she has a very, very accurate memory. And of course, she is one of several people who now maintain that a senior political figure was involved in the abuse of children around Beechwood and other Nottingham children's homes, including in the transfer of children to Dolphin Square in London by Sunshine Variety Club minibuses. So silence there with a court system. Is there justice, Mike? I think we are seeing common law as thrown out the door. This is Stalinist, what we're seeing at the moment.
Absolutely. And of course, many people, Brian, ask what they can do. Well, a very simple thing to do. You've highlighted the fact that people are finding it increasingly difficult as members of the public to go and watch justice being done in courts. If we don't reassert our rights, if we don't reassert the rule of law and our rights, then we lose them because they're closing the gates by security. So you have the right to enter a court and watch the court cases going on. These things are supposed to happen in public. You might like to exercise that right once in a while as a smaller group of people. Going to your local court, going to your local council chamber, going to whatever other event which is supposed to take place in public, and just being there to watch it happen and see the effect that has.
And the other thing I'm going to say is important that we focus on the reality. The reality is that we're now living in a lawless country. We have criminals and sexual perverts in Westminster. They are the ones making this policy that we're describing in the news today. It's up to us to get amongst it and to expose it. It is not enough to be sat at home sending emails about Brexit or any other single topic. We are dealing with a complete breakdown of law and order in UK. David, just a couple of closing remarks, if you'd like.
Yeah, two things. Where Crispin Blunt has popped up, having a good pop at Cameron here. Maybe there's an idea that they're going to bury some of this stuff with him going. But it's rather ironic, really, because Crispin Blunt has completely avoided an open offer for a full briefing from us on EU military union. So frankly, for a Brexiteer and all the things that he's talking about, it doesn't really make any sense that he wouldn't at least want to know what was on that subject. So does he already know about it? And if so, what does he know and why isn't he speaking about it? Secondly, I've got two antique naval maps up here behind me in a bit of a closed loop thing with Theresa May. A couple of years ago, I saw her at a meeting, and she said that many years ago, the first Home Secretary that was female went out with Admiral Beatty, knocking doors and canvassing for votes, which is a rather interesting concept 100 years on, that you'd have politicians going out with admirals canvassing. But I've put these two maps up of Jutland just in terms of, we've really, everybody's got to get back to the sort of brass tacks here with this. And if you expect these people to do the right thing, you would be making a fundamental mistake because they're not. And how on earth we're all going to have to sort of come together and pull together on this. We're going to have to do it very quickly, and we're going to have to, I think, pretty much, I'm in agreement, get behind this concept of getting the rule of law back, because these people clearly have no idea or no regard.
Yeah. Okay, David, thank you very much for joining us. I think the reality is unfolding very quickly, and we'll just say, isn't it wonderful that it would appear that Mr. Soros is getting very uncomfortable indeed, because some elements of the public are waking up. And of course, the internet is a key tool for that research. That brings us to the end of today's news. Don't forget Glastonbury tomorrow. Do attend if you can. And if you're not a signed up member of the UK column, a subscriber, please consider doing that. And if you can make a donation, we would appreciate it. We can only do what we do with your help and financial support. Thanks very much for joining us. Mike will be back tomorrow, and I will be back on Friday. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.